3. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning. Whether you are a morning bird or a night owl, I am just so glad that you are here with us on the latest and greatest installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast, a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, a leading engagement and scientific consulting firm helping you navigate this rapidly changing world. As you walk into tomorrow, just know that the Science Policy Action Network is your partner. If you're looking for more information, be sure to check out span-inc.org. That's span-inc.org. And we have to give a huge shout out for the folks who made today's episode possible. That is Jonathan Howard, owner of the Howard Property Group, an affiliate of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, helping families in the Triangle find their first or forever home. Today, I'm honored to introduce my guest, Dr. Francesca Tripodi. She is an associate professor at the School of Information and Library Science and principal investigator at UNC's Center for Information Technology and Public Life. Dr. Tripodi's research examines how search engines, Wikipedia, and algorithms shape what people know and believe, and how these systems can be exploited to influence. From her Senate testimony on algorithmic manipulation to her studies of gender bias in online knowledge systems, her work shines a light on the hidden ways information is curated and controlled. I hope I did that work service in that introduction. Dr. Tripodi, thank you so much for joining us on the Richard Watkins Podcast. What did I leave out?
I don't know. I think that was great. That was yeah, no, that was a great introduction. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. So Dr. Tripodi, take us all the way back, right? How did you get into this work? How did you start wanting to gain information on information? Right? How did you start out? Where did you get? So another reason why we do this podcast is not only to know how you do your research, but how did you come to do it? Just in case anyone wants to follow in your footsteps. So, how did you
That's a
start your
great
research
question.
career?
That's a great question. I am a sociologist. That is my background. And I had the opportunity as a sociologist to think about a lot of things that are socially constructed realities that we might take for granted as everyday normal people living in this world. And a huge part of sociology is the social construction of knowledge or the social construction of reality. How do we come to agree on what's important? How do we come to agree on these shared expectations or norms or values? And when I say social construction, that concept has been really co-opted lately. That doesn't mean it's not real, right? So when we say something like, our realities are socially constructed, we're not saying they don't exist. What sociologists are saying is that things could be otherwise. It's not a natural or inevitable way that we exist, and that there are efforts at play, power structures at play, that keep us in these systems that most of us don't really pay much attention to. So that is my kind of intellectual itch, right? How do we come to trust and know and count on information? And then my real kind of interest in how information could be obscured or how what constitutes information is contested comes from my research around Wikipedia. As a graduate student, I am an ethnographer, so most of the research that I do is very qualitative based. I was doing ethnographic work or qualitative research.
Ethnographer? I don't even know if I pronounced that right. What is an ethnographer?
Yeah, yes,
Slow down the pronunciation and let us know what it is.
absolutely. Yeah. So ethnography is a form of qualitative research method that was created, I believe, within the field of anthropology, sociology. It's a little confusing where its origins stem. But as an ethnographer, what you're doing is you're a observer in a space that's not participating in that space. Or a joke that I make is that it's sort of like being a spy. Often social scientists are a lot like what they're doing in those three-letter acronym agencies that we aren't allowed to know what they're doing. But it's taking an outside perspective to try to understand what are the unthinking routines, or what are the everyday practices that this community is taking for granted. And so I was really interested in Wikipedia. I had been reading some research on how women are underrepresented on English language Wikipedia. So if you look at Wikipedia, most of us are just interacting with the front end of the website. But there's a lot of stuff that goes in there. And I was reading articles that was saying that of all the biographies on Wikipedia, these are all the notable scientists, academics, artists, writers, all the available biographies, less than 20% are women. And at the time that I was doing my research, it was actually less than 16% were women. And so I was doing ethnographies of what they refer to as editathons. So these were purposeful events that Wikipedians were doing where they would get together, identify extremely important female artists, scientists, writers, etc., and they would take time as a community to write them into Wikipedia. So I was doing ethnography of that space. And then it was through that ethnography that I was seeing notable women that were being added during the editathons were being flagged as non-notable and nominated for deletion from the website, or they were being blocked, saying this person doesn't yet constitute a subject of relevance. And so then I learned through my ethnography that there's a lot of contestation around what gets included or not included along Wikipedia. And I'm happy to talk about any of that more. I could really dive into some rabbit holes there, but that's really where my interest in how does information flow? How is it curated in the 21st century? Because we're no longer going to an Encyclopedia Britannica. And how does this like shift in institutions and power, essentially, how do we go from the library to a search engine? And why does that matter in terms of what do we see, what do we don't, and the perspectives that we form?
Dr. Francesca Tripodi, here with us today on the Richard Watkins Podcast. So, where did you do your undergrad work, and what did you major in? And did you do like a master's and PhD? And where did you do that?
Sure.
How did you? Yeah, I guess I'm trying to figure out like if I were to jump in a time machine and I'm like, all right,
Got
I want to
it.
put
Go
myself
all
in
the
a
way back to
position.
undergrad.
No, you
That's
don't
an
have to tell us
interesting.
about your work then, but I'm
Sure,
just
sure.
basically trying to figure out like how does one get to where you are now? That's
Great.
always really
I
fascinating
hear
to me.
that. So I had like a very long circuitous route to graduate school. I didn't go straight through. In undergrad, I went to University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I majored in communication, and I really thought I was going to work in corporate communication for the entertainment industry. So I worked for Fox Cable Networks Group. I was as an intern there. I was fascinated by like corporate communication. How does a company convey who they are, what they are? And as someone that grew up not in a big city, it was pretty exciting to be in a place like LA and go to work on a movie studio and engage with all that glitter and fame. And then I was extremely fortunate. I got a job offer with a sports team to do corporate communication. And I thought this is what I was going to do. And then I had a phone call with them, and they were like, you're new and there's a game on Christmas Day. And if you take this job, like you're going to work that day. So just like, no, like you're starting from the ground up and here's what we expect. And then I realized I didn't really want to devote my life to things to entertainment. So I kind of restructured myself. I spent a lot of time backpacking after that. I spent some time kind of exploring the rest of the world. And I realized I wanted to do more work in international spaces. So I came back to the United States and I got this job with, it's called the U.S. Telecommunication Training Institute, or USTTI. It's a public-private partnership between, the FCC, NTIA, corporates like Cisco Systems, Qualcomm, Microsoft. And we were working with citizens throughout the globe on how do they build better information infrastructure, whether that be they learned the lessons from things we didn't do so well or implement things we did do well. And then when I was there, I really was interested in more of the intellectual kind of side of that. I started working at Georgetown University, and a friend told me a great little secret that most private schools have what's referred to as tuition remission. And if you work for a private school, you can go to school at those private schools for free if you're an employee. So I changed jobs and I started working in the health sciences department there, for like a nonprofit that they were running a grant for kids from rural areas in America who are interested in STEM. And so a lot of my work was kind of running that program. And while I ran that program, I also got my master's at Georgetown in communication, culture, and technology. It's called the CCT program. It was a great program. I learned a lot. I was like really developing more this question around international work, media, representation. I did a thesis there with a professor who's now at UW, but at the time, Dr. David Rebus. And he was like, you're asking sociological questions. He's a sociologist, spoiler. And he's like, the questions you're asking aren't actually like communication questions, they're sociology questions. And so I thought, cool, I should go back to school more and become a sociologist. And there's not a lot of sociologists that study media, surprisingly. Sadly, I think still to this day, the discipline's really siloed and doesn't really consider what I think to be core fundamental sociology questions. It's actually why I'm in an I school versus a sociology department. And anyways, I went to UVA to get my grad degree and then connected with some really fabulous mentors there. Siva Vaidyanathan and Andrea Press were like huge with helping me with my career there. And so I had my fellowship, my funding came through the media studies department, but my degree came through sociology. So I took all my coursework in sociology, but I did all my TAing for the media studies department. And that was really fantastic because I continued to be what I consider to be very interdisciplinary. And then through those connections, I was able to apply for a postdoc at Data and Society in Manhattan, where I was connected with Dana Boyd, who is, I consider, a very dear friend and mentor. And really, I credit her for kind of taking my career to the next level. And my postdoc is how I was able to write my book, which, giving me a year of full resources to do a research project from the ground up was an experience I will never get again, right? Because I had no other obligations besides a full year of doing research. And so that was incredible. And then at the same time I got my postdoc offer, I was also offered a position at James Madison University. And that was an extremely rewarding experience. I got to work with a lot of undergraduates, which is so cool because undergrads are awesome. But unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of flexibility for me to do research and teaching there. It's really just mostly teaching. So then when this opportunity arose as a job opening, I thought, okay, I'm just gonna put my hat in the ring and see what happens. And I'm so excited. It's a great place. And CITAP is an incredible center full of just really vibrant smart, amazing peers. The School of Information and Library Science is extremely interdisciplinary, researchers coming from like all backgrounds, all invested in this like information infrastructure, which is actually the questions I was asking, but we are all asking it from like a different perspective, which is super cool. So that's like, decades of my life coming back from here to there. But it was a very like, maybe I'm going to do this and maybe I'm going to do that. And then I finally found what I'm actually doing. Like I was sort of asking these same questions all along, but never really knew where my fit was.
I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to provide this
Sure.
context of who the person is behind this amazing work. One more question, and we're
Great.
gonna just dive right into like all of the juiciness of the constructs that we create and how information is curated. Because we're engaged in information curation right now. At least I
Yeah.
guess I might be wrong, but what is a sociologist? I mean, just for the people in the back, right? For the people in the back row who might have come in a little late,
Oh my
what's a
goodness.
sociologist?
What is a sociologist? What am I? That's a great question. I'm trying to think of a way to describe it that's for just everyday people. Sociologists are researchers, we're scientists, we're social scientists that are interested in asking why questions so that we can better understand the power dynamics that are often invisible, but very much structure how we live our lives. So I think that was a good way of defining us for. I'm trying to think if I was just talking to a super smart person that isn't a sociology student, that's how I would describe what a
I love
sociologist
it. No,
does.
I get it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And I
There's a
love social.
Yeah, sorry, there's a really great like really great kind of I don't even know maybe it's like a free write where a sociologist is like, if you've ever, looked across the way and not wondered what is behind your neighbor's blinds, you're definitely not a sociologist. If you've ever, been driving down the street and wondered why we all stop at this red light and all go at the green, then you're not a sociologist. If you've never wondered. And so it's kind of this, I think what I love about the sociological imagination is that we're constantly questioning why it is that these are the rules that we follow.
I love it. I just earlier this morning, I was getting a sausage biscuit at
Okay.
McDonald's.
Okay.
And this McDonald's has two kind of speakers that you can deliver your order.
Okay.
And I was wondering what in the world was going on because there's clearly two lines, but only one line had cars in it. And it was an extremely long line, about 8 cars deep. And I was like, wait, what's going on? And I just went around and I went to the other speaker, which was completely available for everyone to use. But some unwritten rule informed everyone that, hey, listen, if somebody else is there, then I am just to get in line.
Right. So thinking about
Or-
what are all these assumptions? I mean, that's a great thing that we think about, right? When you travel to other countries, this concept of line following is very strong in some places and not in others, you know?
Okay. You were talking about rabbit holes. I love rabbit holes. I
Sure.
mean, just if I see a rabbit hole somewhere, I'm just going to jump in it. But I want to stay on topic. I want to get right back into what you were talking about.
Great.
Let's talk about how information is curated. And also, could you touch on why information is curated?
Hmm. Well,
You
curation,
said all
yeah,
sociologists think about is why, so I just thought I'd ask
yeah,
for
yeah,
why.
yeah. So, well, no, the reason I paused is the phrase curation can mean a lot of different things. So it can mean how information is organized. It can mean how we decide which kinds of information to store or not. It can mean how we preserve certain kinds of information over others. It can mean who gets to write the history book and why. So the word curation is like kind of, that's why I hesitated. It's fraught, and that could just be a whole episode. And I would ask, you'd want to have an archivist, you'd want to have a librarian, you'd want to have a meta scientist, right? You'd want to have someone who specializes in like information retrieval and like database management, because there's so much that constitutes information.
So, okay. I felt like you are all of those people you just mentioned, but
No, I'm definitely not. Like, I'm not an archivist. So I think an archivist asks really cool questions about like what kind of information do we preserve? Um, what gets to be elevated to like preservation status and why? I think librarians ask really important questions about like, how do I organize this? Is this fiction? Is this nonfiction? I mean, if you look at like the classic system of how titles are categorized, some religions are considered religions, and some religions that other people would consider to be religions are not categorized or shelved with other religions at a library. And I would say those aren't the questions that I'm asking. But I do think that those are really important questions, but they're different than my area of expertise.
fascinating. So break it down. Tell me again, or tell us the questions that you're asking.
Awesome. So I would say the central question that I ask, the big thing that I ask over and over again, is how do people come to find information they can trust? And most of that I'm looking at is engagement with online platforms. So I'm really interested in participatory platforms, so spaces where people have stake in what gets created, how it gets how it gets found, and how information is ordered on like search engine results pages, although now those are superfluous because we have Gen AI taking over search. So these are kinds of the questions that I'm really interested in. And then also I would say I'm even more narrowed in on like uh, questions around like democracy. So a lot of my research was looking at, you're going to the voting poll, you're about to go vote. How do you find out information about this person you're about to go vote for? And the really big interest in that came from when I was at my postdoc, because in 2016, almost everyone thought that answer was Facebook. And I was doing research around the governor's race happening in Virginia. And I did just a quick survey of people as they exited polls. So they went to vote in the primary election and they were exiting the polls. And I asked them, how did you find out about who you just voted for? And almost everybody just said Google. And I was expecting everyone to say Facebook, because at the time that was the narrative everyone was saying. Social media, everyone gets their information from social media. Social media is ruining how we find information. But it turned out everybody that I talked to was going to Google. And when I asked them what did that mean, they said, oh, I just put in the person's name and I press enter. And I would say, well, then what? And they looked at me like I didn't know what Google was, or that they were very worried about me. I mean, my favorite response was an older woman. She was probably in her late 60s. that when I said, but then what do you mean? She like looked at me and really slowly, she's like, well, I type the name into Google and then you press enter. Cause I think she was really worried that I didn't know what it was or something. And then I realized, of course, nobody really knows. Nobody really has an answer to that. We've just kind of taken for granted that the information returned to us on Google is right. And then I was able to read this book by Sophia Noble called Algorithms of Oppression. And she primarily studies Google. And her work, she's also an information scholar. And her work really blew open the doors for me in terms of why there are sociological questions baked into that answer. And so then that's really where I've been focused now for like a solid 10 years is search engines, queries, worldviews. Like, so how does our query formation or the types of questions we ask or the words we use when we ask our question influence those results? And then I'm also interested on the other side of it. How do corporations or political actors manipulate those results? So I'm interested in kind of both sides of the equation. What is the human element in that process? And then how might the system impact that process as well?
Well, let's first start with the human element. Having looked at it now for 10 years, from uh, someone in the voting line explaining what a Google search is to you, to where you are now, how has that evolved? How has your understanding of the human side, how people are asking questions, how are people crafting their queries? How has that changed? Has it changed? What is it like?
So I would say not a lot has changed in the sense that what I realized from that first research project is that our words matter so much more than we think. And there's been a lot of really great sociolinguistic, which is just the combination of linguistics and sociology. There's been a lot of really important work that's talked about why words matter and how the way we see the world shapes the kinds of words we use. And it's like and also there have been really significant political strategists that have harnessed that ability to create language around certain subjects, change the language around certain subjects, and really drive those, I call them kind of linguistic mirrors back to us. But I didn't really think much about how how that extends to search engines. And I was shocked because I started realizing it came to me when um, I was doing an interview with someone who was talking about the Colin Kaepernick protests that were happening with the NFL. And she was like, these protests have really impacted ratings. Ratings for the NFL are way down. And it reminded me of something that the president at the time, President Trump at the time, had said the same thing. NFL ratings way down. So I just used those words, NFL ratings way down, and I searched it in Google. And all the information returned was confirming that. But then I was like, well, what if I believe the opposite? And I just searched NFL ratings way up. And all of a sudden, all these sources are confirming that NFL ratings are up in certain teams or certain things. Like different data was saying different things. One story was saying NFL ratings are down, but because of more concussion awareness, nothing to do with these like protests. So I was getting all this very like in just the matter of minutes, like changing the word down to up, I got a totally different set of informational returns. Some of them even the same sources, some of them both ESPN, right? And so I started thinking, like, how else might this be? What else is happening here? So then I went back to my sociology of like knowledge research, and I started thinking about something less political. And this is what I talk about a lot in my talks, and I talk about this in my book. But something is seemingly inevitable as the color of the sky. And if you search the sky is blue, all the information returned to you is that the sky is blue. But if you search the sky is not blue, you get information on why that's complicated, why light is shifted based on how we see the world. And either one of these have sources from reputable sources of information, kind of confirming both realities. And then I started saying, well, what if I was convinced the sky was green and I just searched the sky is green, or the sky is red, or the sky is purple? And in every iteration, your browser is going to confirm that reality, because the goal of a browser is not to challenge your way of knowing. It's to match the words that you've put in the search bar and give you information that they think is the most relevant to your
Right.
query.
To the folks that are listening, I literally did, as you were speaking in real time,
Yeah.
what you just said. And that is exactly what just happened.
It is. I mean, I encourage anybody, I do this at my talks too, like take your cell phone out, search it while we're doing it. And let me know if anything else, like, let me know if these results don't change. And I've been doing this now, I've been saying this out loud in public spaces for over 4 years, and even in different country contexts. And so, like, thinking about that, thinking about how our worldview is reflected in these queries, I think was surprisingly something that a lot of social scientists weren't yet talking about, which, as you know, as a scientist, if you find something that's like, what? People aren't saying this yet, your brain kind of explodes a little bit, because you're like, oh my gosh, I can add to something. This is so exciting, one. But then also it just seemed like way too obvious to be a scientific finding, right? Our words matter. This is really going to blow everybody's mind. But it started to, I realized people weren't thinking about it in this way. Like, I officially blended, right, the sociologist in me with the information scholar in me. But then I started thinking about it more complicated. If you're looking for something around voting and immigration, if the words you're using are words like illegal alien, or the words you're using are words like undocumented citizen, those come with it very different perspectives, and the information returned is going to reflect those perspectives. But the other thing, and I think, but what Sophia Noble taught me is that it's not as simple as that there are also larger structures at play that can manipulate this. So for folks who are unfamiliar with her work started because she is a Black woman and had her nieces who are Black women coming to visit. And she Googled like Black girl fun, because she wanted to try to figure out, what should I do in LA with my Black niece, with my nieces who are coming into town. And all that got returned to her was a whole bunch of pornography. And she was like, well, that's not my reality. That's not reflective of Black women I know. And so she started thinking about, okay, what are the political structures at play that tag or conceptualize or only provide space for this subjective Black experience? And how might these returns be complicated by those political, economic, social structures? So I take kind of some of the stuff I found, but then think more complex about it. What are the corporate political structures at play that might complicate those returns more than simply our biases reflected back to us? How might societal biases reflect back to us as well?
So you mentioned, corporate influences and so on and so forth. How would, like, by corporation, you don't mean like every single corporation. A corporation is just like a legal tax status. I mean, unless I'm wrong. I mean,
Oh, no, no.
how
Okay,
would
that's a great example. That's a really good qualification. What I mean is, how do corporate interests, aka money, monetary interests, shape the kind of information that's returned to us? And how might political interests or like power structures shape? So, for example, Sophia Noble found a lot of the reason that Black girls was returning pornographic context was that the porn industry had paid a ton of money in search engine optimization to drive to the top. And what I think her most valuable lesson is that we think of search engines as the friendly librarian, but a search engine is a publicly traded private company that is designed to maximize shareholder interests. It is not a public institution like a library. So the information that's going to be returned to you cannot be disconnected from that corporate corporate connection. So that's what I mean by corporate interests. In
wait?
one of
So
the
how does
studies, go ahead.
I apologize.
Oh, okay.
I'm so sorry. Because this is just absolutely fascinating. Because the stuff that you're talking about impacts entire worldviews and how we perceive things. And as you stated, I mean, we don't necessarily know how we're getting the information that we get. But how does this connect to a question such as like the purple sky or the green sky? It connects, and correct me if I'm wrong, it connects to that model, that customer satisfaction model, where the searches are to align with what a customer expects to see. And then if you were to take it a step further, and then you have a customer that is paying to have their information boosted to the top, then that's when you start getting this kind of I don't even know how to explain it. Manipulation
Yeah, no, it is
of what you're
manipulation.
saying.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the best example of that is a study I did with a researcher here at UNC. It's called Abortion Near Me, question mark. And we did a study where we were doing interviews with people around the country, excuse me, around the state of North Carolina. We looked at voter districts, and we went to places that were really heavy red and places that were really heavy blue. And we asked extremely politically polarizing questions, like they were part of our prompts. And one of the prompts we asked was, a good friend of yours found out they're unexpectedly pregnant and are considering terminating the pregnancy. Do you have an opinion? Because everybody does on this subject. And we had like roughly a 60-40 split. About 60% said they would support their friend's decision. 40% said they did not support their friend's decision. So we'll think about how this complex interaction with information is complicated. So for the 40% that said they didn't support, they all had queries that matched that worldview, right? They were saying alternatives for abortion, or why abortion is a sin, or how do I convince my friend not to have an abortion? And in none of those returns, as you would expect, Planned Parenthood didn't show up in any of those returns. That's not really surprising. To me, that's like matching the returns with the worldview. But here's when it becomes complicated. The 60% that did support their friend's decision had a lot more consistency in their queries. And basically, they searched one of two things. Either they searched Planned Parenthood directly, and then they got the Planned Parenthood, or they searched abortion near me, or they searched abortion, insert whatever city we were in. And on those queries, the top return over and over again were crisis prevention centers, which do not offer abortions, are actually designed to dissuade people from having abortions, and were listed alongside abortion facilities. And I would say this is because, and they were the top ad content. So ad content, you can see that it's an ad content. They're always the top ad content. And there has been really good investigative journalism that's shown Google, for example, made billions of dollars in prioritizing that ad space, especially after the fall of Roe versus Wade, and that they profited in the billions because of that ad placement. But then it was also integrated in the maps, right? Where if someone was trying to find an abortion near them, they could be directed to a facility that doesn't offer that health service. So this is where I argue this is an example of how corporate interests and political interests complicate those returns. And the political interests, you have these like political organizations that are designed to dissuade persons from having abortions. They're clearly heavily funded if they're able to purchase that kind of revenue, that kind of ad space. And they are, I would argue, impeding people's access to health services. So, for example, if I was searching like heart defibrillator near me, or like having a heart attack, and they were giving me supply information, like a supplier's information for how to access like heart monitoring systems, I would say that's a similar way in which corporate interests have now prevented persons from getting information that is most relevant to the information they're looking for.
All right. So you said two things I want to touch on, and I'm going to say one, and hopefully I don't forget about the second later. But one of the other things that you're also touching on is how, again, for lack of a better word, malleable people are, right? We know this through commercials, we know this through advertisement, and we also now know it through information. And there's also this kind of if you can view something as being authority, right? So if you're already looking at this information like, okay, this is the information, and you can sneak something in and it looks authoritative. I don't even know if that's the best word, but you're going to just go ahead and believe it because we're kind of conditioned already to kind of take in that information, going from the shock experiment of Stanley Milgram. We'll do whatever an authority figure, tells us to do, especially if it looks a certain way. Like if I have on a white lab coat and I'm telling you to shock the person to the maximum voltage, you'll just do it. I mean, that's what it'll say. Is that a fair statement? And it's no knock on anybody, but people are impressionable.
Absolutely. I mean, so there's been research that shows that the way that search engines are ordered influences their level of believability. And my own research finds that people think the top returns of Google are more reliable, more accurate, more believable sources of information. I think what you're getting at is actually particularly concerning in a generative AI search environment, because now we no longer have a list of sources. We have summaries that sound extremely knowledgeable and authoritative. They are actually programmed to believe to be statistically probably, their statistical probability has been calculated so that they sound authoritative, right? We've applied math to linguistics in order to create a statistical probability that's designed to make us think that this is an authoritative, reliable source. And the citations are embedded in a way that I think is tied to search literacy. I don't think we know how to navigate what those are, but it's also unclear to me and other researchers in this space, how were those citations determined to be credible source of information? So going back again to my research, if you search right now, abortion risk, you will get a summary, an AI generated summary from Google that has like paragraphs on the risks of having an abortion. And there are whole segments of these risks, psychological risks, risk of death, right? Where the citation that is cited for where that information comes from is a crisis pregnancy center. So that's very concerning, right? That we are moving, actually, I would say even more removed from this exploratory search space into an increasingly auto-generated space.
And I still remember my question, but now I have a different question, so I'm going to keep punting that question. But we've always, and maybe we haven't always, but as long as we've been an organized society, people have been told what to think about things by authorities, governing bodies. I mean, that's classic, right? Or am I wrong? Was there a point in human history where we're allowed to just think whatever we want to think? Or is it the case that a natural phenomenon of society is that in order for a society to be a society or a community, people have to be instructed on how to feel about things? Now, you have outliers, but for the most part, people are generally told what to think about things.
So I think, so a sociologist says, we come to decide on like an agreed upon understanding of who gets to convey truth and knowledge. So a big thing that I talk about in my like sociology 101 classes is we often that phrase, knowledge is power. We hear it a lot as kids, especially in the school system. It was, I think, like a commercial in the 90s where like a book comes out and it's like, the more you know, knowledge is power. And I think we're taught that it's like the more we learn about stuff, the more power we can have in society. But what the sociological perspective says, whoever's in power controls the knowledge. And so we've throughout time determined who those conveyors of truth are. And there are lots of different things that filter into this. Colonialism might filter into this. Women's rights factor into this. Racial equity factors into this. I mean, there's so many things that can shift. And so I think what sociologists looks at, right, is like, what are the conditions that allow for changes or shifts to happen? And also, what are the structures in place meant to undermine those shifts or prevent those shifts from happening? I don't think it's always so much like people have been told what to think, but we've always had, humans have systems in place where we determine what we agreed upon to be sources of truth, accurate information. That doesn't mean we're right, but I think philosophers have been thinking about this. I mean, Plato's Republic,
Oh, that's what
allegory
I was
of the
just about
cave.
to say.
Yeah, allegory of the cave is kind of like the
Or there's
original.
that argument they're having, and he's like, how do you get all these people to believe something that's ridiculous? And he's like, well, just tell the kids And the kids, they'll grow up and be adults and they'll believe it. And then they'll tell their kids. And before
Yeah,
you know it, it's just the
it's
truth.
just the truth. And I think some of that's true, but I think there are still these like, we also know, right, that like, that that doesn't always happen. And this is where the sociologist intersects with the philosopher to say, sure, as long as the kids who are saying it come from families that won't get stoned to death for spreading information that other communities don't agree with, right? So I think there's this like element in play here where we have to consider some of the broader structures in play that might prevent those shifts in knowledge.
So what so we've touched on the human element. We dabbled a little bit in some of the powers that be. And I guess one of the questions that I have now is, what is a person to do? What is someone to do? It's like, all right, you've convinced me the decks are stacked against us. Should I just throw up my hands? Or is there something that I can do? Or maybe I should just get a library card and go to my local library.
So, I mean, I would say if the one thing a listener does is go to the library and get a library card, my work is done. I think more of us need to be engaging with our library because our libraries are under attack, and it is a scary time for us not to be supporting public sources of information like a library. I would also say that, and the joke I make often, sociologists are really good at identifying the problems, but we don't actually fix them. That's somebody else's job. But I do think that public policy or I think it's extremely concerning that we don't really have any kind of AI oversight into how these tools are being integrated right now. It is a lot of these governance structures are industry driven, and many of like the state safeguards are being diluted. And I think we should be very concerned about the kind of proliferation of AI, especially in like automated information generation. I do also think that a big thing that we can do is just take that time to click on those sources. There's a great group of researchers out of Stanford that I had an opportunity to collaborate with that created this concept called lateral reading. So we often read from the top to the bottom, or we go to a website and we read the about page on the website, and we just sort of stay insular and go up and down on on the on the page. But they often encourage us to open a new page and kind of think laterally across the internet and kind of check the source, not just check the source. Don't just go necessarily to a source itself for the information, but also think a little deeper. Who is this source? Where are they getting their information from? And then the other thing is just to kind of understand, how do we play a role in the information that's returned to us? So just being mindful of our query, of our starting point. What are the keywords we're using? Why are we using this? This is particularly important, I believe, in breaking conspiratorial logic. Often conspiracists or like cults will craft language unique to those groups. And if you see something on social media and you're like, oh, I'm going to check that fact, I'm going to go and do some lateral reading, but you use that exact same phrase, the only information you're going to find is likely information that's been curated by that same group or those same people So think about how you might want to use that query on other sources, right? Does a major news creator from different perspectives write about this subject? If not, why? Like, that's a good question. So I think we can ask our own selves why. Why are these the words that I'm using? Why might this be the information being returned to me? Why am I only seeing like one side of this perspective? Yeah.
And I just have just two more questions,
Okay.
and
Now,
I just
just to
have.
be fair, my office hours are starting, so I might not be able
You
to
can
do.
bring your student in. I'm going to ask them a question.
Okay.
No, actually, we'll skip right to the last
Okay.
question
Great.
because what you do is absolutely incredible, and I know the work that you do with students is important, and I
Yes.
know the importance of office hours. So I'm going to go
Yes.
ahead and let you know.
Go to office hours. That's important.
So my last question is, I'm going to turn the tables on you. I get an opportunity to talk to some of the most fascinating minds in the world, and you are included. And what always happens is I kick myself because I should have asked this or I should have asked that. So I'm going to ask you, what question should I have asked you, and then provide an answer to that.
What questions you asked me? This is a great ethnographic question. I ask this often in my own interviews. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that I didn't ask you? So maybe you're actually a qualitative researcher, Richard, and you are you have a new career ahead of you as a sociologist. I think the only thing that we hadn't talked about is how platforms are interconnected. So one thing that I think people don't necessarily realize is that information gaps or information on one place can be used or can spread outside of that platform. So for example, women are underrepresented on English language Wikipedia. But Wikipedia data was used to train a lot of these large language models, which is what generative AI is using. And so you can see this when you search for like 10 notable, if you search 10 notable scientists, like 9 are men, and it's always Marie Curie as the woman. And that's great. I mean, she's great. But you actually have to qualify it in order to get more diversity. Also, we say this with, the geographic identity as well as racial identity. Often the scientists are Western, are white, are men, and most of them are dead. And so you have to kind of qualify that in order to get those information outside of that generic information return. And so I would just say, consider how these absences or these biases that were discovered, for example, in like all the way back in the encyclopedia, and W.E.B. Du Bois, who talks a lot about the inequity in what constitutes knowledge. Those insights that he provided to us in 1935 are still relevant because that knowledge was used to curate the next round, the next round, the next round, the next round. And so even though there are topics that might not be discussed as much or researched as much because we're losing a lot of funding in this space, they are more relevant and more important than ever.
Great closing. Dr. Francesca Tripodi, sociologist with UNC Center for Information, Technology, and Public Life. We have to give a huge shout out for the sponsor, the folks who make this episode possible. Jonathan Howard, owner of the Howard Property Group and affiliate of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, helping families in the Triangle find their forever or their first homes. The Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network. And folks, if you're checking this out, remember this one thing. If you don't remember anything else, that the future is not something to wait for, it is something to build. Thank you so much and take care.